Hi, you're watching Floyd Steinberg's YouTube channel. Earlier this year I was at Superbooth and I met Garrett from Retrokits there, and I had a very nice chat with him because I visited a lot of booths on Superbooth. Nearly every second one of them had this thing here, the Retrokits RK-008 mini sequencer. And when I asked people, well, what's that thing? They sent me to Retrokits and I decided I need this in my life, so I bought one. So a few weeks later a parcel arrived, and to my big surprise, not only the RK-008 was in this package, but a lot of more stuff. So if you're interested what it was, please join me in this video. Here we go. So here's what was inside the package. Of course, the RK-008 hardware sequencer. Then they sent me a USB hub, which is nice. Here's the RK-006 multiple MIDI interface. Then they sent me this Quickie here, which is an audio or MIDI splitter. Here's the RK-002, which is a smart MIDI cable. This is very cool. We'll take a look at some examples later. I also got this TRS A to B adapter, which comes in very handy with my Donner N25 keyboard. And there were some of these MIDI adapters in here as well. So let's take a look at these, starting with the MIDI USB host. Okay, let's begin with the Quickie. This is a minimal mixer, so to speak. There are 9 inputs, 1 output. It's obviously very handy for small synth setups, so let's build one quickly. Here we have this, and this, and this. Now let's add all the cables to this. So here we have a power bank. Here's a USB cable, so let's add this here. And we also need another USB cable for this keyboard. So let's add that here and plug the keyboard into the mini decks here. And we also have one more USB cable. So let's add this here, so we can power up this thing here, Synths Academy Touch. So now we should be able to hear both of them, and let's also add a recorder so we can capture the audio. My apologies for this chaos here. Next up we have the RK-006, which is based on the same design principles as the Quickie, but instead of audio we're dealing with MIDI data here. This is a MIDI USB host or a MIDI interface. So we've got a USB port here, and we've got 5 MIDI outputs on the left side and 5 MIDI outputs on the right side, and on the bottom side we've got 2 MIDI in ports. So that's 10 MIDI outputs in your DAW, and if you think about it, each MIDI channel can separately control one MIDI device, so you could use this to control up to 160 external hardware synthesizers or other MIDI devices, which is a fairly big studio in my books. The RK-006 can be configured with a web interface, and each output can run either in MIDI mode or in gate mode, which is useful for controlling, for example, the Teenage Engineering pocket operator devices or others. In standalone mode, this becomes a multi-tool of sorts. You can merge the MIDI data, or you can distribute it to the different ports here. It can also send and receive MIDI sync signals if you have a set of MIDI devices and you want to route MIDI data between them in some way. The RK-006 almost certainly has some kind of setup that will be the solution to your problem. For example, you have a MIDI keyboard that only has a USB port, and you have an old synthesizer that only has 5-pin MIDI. Let's see how we can connect these two devices using the RK-006. The RK-006 comes with this OTG cable here, which has an additional power supply input here. So we can connect this like so. Now I'll connect a speaker to the Zoom R4 so I can hear something. Now we need to connect the keyboard to the USB port here. We want to supply all of this with power from this power bank. So let's Connect this one here into the USB OTG cable. There's one more USB connection here, and I'll just plug it into my power bank and turn it on. Okay, so keyboard's connected to the RK-006 by USB. Then we've got the MIDI out TRS going into the microdex here, microdex audio out going into the R4, R4 going into the speaker. Yeah, the RK-006. Cool little gadget, much more powerful than you would judge by its size. The next thing I found in the box was the RK-002 Smart MIDI cable. This cable has an Arduino-compatible processor built into its connection socket, which is powered by the MIDI port of the MIDI device you're connecting it to. Using this setup, the cable can process all MIDI data that goes through it and add all kinds of useful functionality to your setup that wasn't there previously. For example, you can add an LFO to your synth, which then can control filter cutoff frequency or pitch with the LFO amplitude controllable with your synth's mod wheel. Retrokits has built an online editor for the Arduino code, which not only makes developing but also exchanging code with other users super easy. From that webpage, you can easily compile and upload code to the RK-002. You just need to connect it both to the MIDI in and out of your computer, for example using the RK-006 interface. In order to use the functions, just use the RK-002 instead of your usual MIDI cable. It comes in handy. You can unplug the TRS adapter and add another 5-pin adapter to the other side. Here's the cable in action, changing the filter cutoff frequency and pitch and volume of a pad sound on the MU2000. Using the mod wheel, I can control the strength of the effect. For comparison, here's the same sound played without the RK-002. And finally, the star of the show, the RK-008. This pocket calculator-sized MIDI sequencer has 2 MIDI in and 2 MIDI out ports and a USB connector. It's both battery and USB powered, and it was inspired by the Alesis MMT8 hardware sequencer, which was a thing in the 80s and on which Espen Kraft made a great video worth watching. The RK-008 has a tiny but informative display and a number block and function buttons and play, stop and record buttons as well, of course. It has an internal speaker you can run a metronome click on. The RK-008 can sync to external MIDI devices as master or slave. You can work with 8 tracks here, but those are not MIDI tracks but rather patterns of variable length that can capture 16 MIDI channels each and then can be arranged in whatever way you see fit to create a song. All songs you've created can be downloaded to a computer using Retrokits' RK-008 Manager page, where it's also possible to update the firmware of the sequencer. The RK-008 really does it all: real-time looping, non-destructive editing and quantizing, MIDI routing and filtering, and much more. It's really accessible as well. Pushing the Alt button lets you access the functions printed in orange. Multi-timbre synths go very well with the RK-008, and in the following example, I've set up a performance on the Montage M, recording a loop by switching from one channel to the next. The RK-008 isn't cheap, but it's also one of a kind. There's nothing comparable around that lets you create whole songs and loops so easily. No wonder it was all over Superbooth last year. Yeah, and that was my Retrokits care package. Thanks a lot once again to Garrett from Retrokits for sending me all this stuff. Much appreciated and very useful. So if you think this was a good YouTube video, please do the YouTube thing. As always, thanks for watching and see you again very, very soon. Bye bye!